protest. We just do that. So this is a familiar technique, and it works. The Philippines are still under that control. It's 100 years. And that's one of the reasons why the Philippines, the one American colony in East Asia, Southeast Asia, hasn't joined the exciting economic developments of the past 20 years. It's not one of the Southeast Asian, East Asian tigers. So that's a model which can be followed and which might work if we allow it. There are, of course, pretexts for all of this. Whatever a state does, there's a pretext. Security. Whatever you do, it's in self-defense, kind of by definition. And as usual, in this case, the pretext doesn't stand up to a moment's scrutiny. So take, say, the annexation wall. I mean, if the reason that's offered is defense, security. I mean, if the concern were security, we know exactly what would be done. The wall would be built on the international border. It could be made impregnable, patrolled on both sides, a mile high, totally secure, and that would give security. But of course, if the purpose is what it actually is, namely to steal land and resources, then it can't be built on the international border, where it might furthermore inconvenience Israelis instead of just inconveniencing and, in fact, stealing from Palestinians. And the same is true of the attack on Gaza. It's almost universally accepted here, and in the West generally, that Israel had a right of self-defense and therefore was justified in attacking Gaza, even though the attack was maybe disproportionate. That's accepted, for example, by the Goldstone Report. The Goldstone Report is a very valuable account of the atrocities that were carried out in the course of the war, but they're regarded as disproportionate actions in a legitimate war of self-defense. Well, if you think about it for a minute, there is indeed a right of self-defense. Sure, everyone agrees to that. But there is no right of self-defense by force. Now, that has to be argued. And there's extensive international law and just common sense on this. You do not have the right to use force in self-defense unless you have exhausted peaceful means. Well, in this case, there definitely were peaceful means. The U.S. and Israel knew it, and they chose not to even attempt them because they wanted a war. They wanted to attack. The peaceful means were obvious. They're not controversial. There had been a ceasefire initiated the preceding June 2008. Israel concedes officially that during the ceasefire there was not a single Hamas rocket fired. Sderot was quiet. The ceasefire was broken on November 4th when, using the cover of the U.S. election, Israel invaded the Gaza Strip, killed half a dozen Hamas activists, and then rockets started firing. In the following month, Hamas offered repeatedly to reinstate the ceasefire. Israel acknowledged it. Cabinet discussed it, decided not to accept it. Okay, no right of use of force in self-defense. It evaporates. That's quite apart from the conditions of international law, which I won't even go into, which are pretty explicit on this, all violated. So the attack itself was a criminal act. The U.S. and Israel are guilty of outright aggression. And if they fired one bullet, it was a crime. And if they carried out the atrocities that they did, it was a crime. And if you look case by case, there's virtually no justification for the claim of security. And in fact, I won't go into the history here, but it goes back at the very least until February 1971. This has kind of been washed out of history because it doesn't look nice for us. But in February 1971, President Sadat of Egypt offered Israel a full peace treaty, nothing for the Palestinians, just mentioned as refugees, on condition that Israel withdraw from the occupied territories. Now, all that he cared about was withdrawal from Egyptian territory. So, in effect, it was an offer of a full peace treaty with all the appropriate guarantees and so on, in return for withdrawal from conquered Egyptian territory. 1 year later, Jordan made the same offer with regard to the West Bank. Full peace treaty if Israel withdraws from the West Bank. Well, at that point, the security problem was over, if Israel wanted it to be over. If they'd accepted those peace treaties, the major Arab state, Egypt, would be out of the conflict, and Jordan, minor Arab state on its other border, would be out of the conflict. Okay, end of security problems. There was no Palestinian security problems to speak of at the time, and if such as there were, could easily have been controlled. But Israel made a decision, fateful decision, to choose expansion over security. At that time, expansion into northeast Sinai, where they were planning to build a huge city, Yamit, and a lot of settlements. The real question is, what's the Godfather going to say? Well, there was debate in Washington. There was an internal controversy. Henry Kissinger won out. His position, as he says, was what he called stalemate. We should have no negotiations, just force. And so Israel was able to reject the peace offer. I won't go into the consequences, but it meant an awful war, a lot of suffering, and constant security problems. And if you look from then through now, it's pretty much the same. I mean, Israel could have security right now. The Arab League has long endorsed the international consensus on a two-state settlement. In fact, they initiated it, the major Arab states, in January 1976, when they introduced a resolution at the Security Council calling for a full peace treaty on the international border. It was vetoed by the United States, and a U.S. veto is a double veto. It doesn't happen, and it's out of history, so we don't talk about that. And so it continues. The Arab states have reiterated in more developed form a peace agreement, full peace agreement. The Organization of Islamic States, which includes Iran, has accepted it. The Hamas has accepted it. In fact, anybody relevant has accepted it, with the exception of the United States and Israel. So yes, there are real security problems, but not justifiable ones. Well, that's among all the reports. Yeah, hope this is a little better. Among all the reports, there were a number of reports that came out about Gaza, the Goldstone reports, an extensive one. Amnesty International published several, Human Rights Watch. They are very revealing. In my opinion, the most revealing of all of them is, at least the most important for us, is an Amnesty International report, which really broke new ground for human rights reports. It went through the weaponry that had been used in the assault against Gaza. A lot of high-tech, destructive, murderous weaponry. It traced it to its source, which is mostly back to us, and it called for an arms embargo. Amnesty International called for an arms embargo on both sides, which means essentially on Israel. That's talking to us. That's saying we ought to join in an arms embargo and stop sending arms in violation of international law and indeed in violation of U.S. law. We should stop violating U.S. law and sending arms to a country that's using them for aggression and violence and destruction. Well, that's a policy that Americans ought to follow. Let's follow U.S. law. Let's try that for a change. And stop sending arms to Israel. Well, that's, I think, adhering to the Amnesty International plea would make a lot of sense. I believe there have been occasional remarks saying that, no good. I'm sorry, I'll try to talk. There have been occasional reports from Human Rights Watch and others saying, some arms shouldn't be sent to a country that's carrying out regular torture and so on. But this is the first call that I know of by a human rights group for a total arms embargo to an aggressive and violent state. And the call is directed to us. We're the ones providing the overwhelming bulk of the arms and are continuing to do it. And I think we should listen to that call. That also suggests something about tactics. If we want to act in ways which are going to change policy, and not just make us feel good, but change policy, the tactics should be directed to Washington. unless Washington changes